Welcome now and good morning on this sixth reading of Daniel for Advent, one chapter a day, Monday through Thursday. Today is Tuesday, December 14th. We left off with the transition between the Empire of Babylon, that head of gold and that great image, to the shoulders and arms and chest. That it becomes the Persian Empire. And what we're going to see is Daniel's template that he has used thus far, or whoever the writer of the book of Daniel is. The template is going to remain pretty consistent at this point. So Darius, or Darius, is the ruler of the empire. And he's going to do some restructuring, unsurprisingly, clean house, bring in your own organization and all of that. He's going to have 120 governors overseeing everything. Out of these 120 governors, there's going to be 3 supervisors, and Daniel is one of those supervisors. So Daniel, who essentially came to Babylon as a slave, has risen up the ranks within Babylon, and then now is even respected in the Persian Empire. This is a subtle way, but yet glaring, that of the people are, they're working in the empire. The empire's acknowledging, their skill set. And, what one has to consider, that here, one of the ways to make change is from the inside. Well, anyway, regardless, Daniel looks something like a Joseph. Remember, sold into slavery into Egypt, the great empire of that time, and yet, because God is with him, Joseph is able to rise up to right hand of Pharaoh. Well, essentially, that's what Daniel appears to be, because there's these 3 supervisors overseeing 120 governors, and Daniel is the one that is excelling. He's rising to the top, and what happens there? This provokes jealousy amongst his peers. They decide to set him up. This story is not unlike another that occurs during the Persian period, and that is that of Esther. Remember, there is Mordecai, a Hebrew, and Naaman becomes jealous and tries to set him up and have all the Hebrews killed, and yet, the Hebrews end up winning this one out, again, in that own way. And the book of Esther is about the resistance and overcoming the empire, and which much of the scripture works and has to interact with the people's conduct during the times of empire. Anyway, so they're going to set Daniel up, and where do they target? They target his religious devotion. That's more than coincidental. It's about identity. Remember, back in chapter number 1, it was over identity. We're going to have you eat our food from our tables of plenty. And, after they had already changed the name of Daniel and his Hebrew friends, now we're going to change your diet, and that was too much. They resisted by maintaining their own diet. And so here it's over his religious devotion is going to become another surrogate for a deeper problem that's occurring. They go to the king, Darius, and present him with a plan. Nobody should pray to any god but you, Darius. And Darius falls for it. Darius isn't presented as being the worst kind of guy here. But he certainly, I've mentioned and remarked on the satire and humor and irony in each chapter, and this is kind of it. Darius can't be that perceptive because he doesn't see through this thing. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't that perceptive. He needed others to come and tell him what his dream was. And it's a subtle jab against the empire, and that's okay. All right, so, and there's another element at work. They told the king nobody can pray to any god but you. This is what, within a very few and small circles, what we call imperial theology. It was noted by one theologian who has written about Roman imperial theology, and it also applies to all empires, both in the past and in the present. Probably much more consciously in the past, undoubtedly much more consciously in the past. It applied here to Persia as well as Babylon. The idea that there is something holy about the empire, that to the extent to where its leaders are elevated to a status of divinity. That was the case with Rome in the time of Jesus. And so what it ends up being is a more than just a civil battle, a social battle. It's a theological, it's a religious battle. Here is the empire with its own theology. Here is your emperor. He is God. Only pray to him. And meanwhile, here are these Hebrews, a smaller subgroup. No, that's not the way we go. All right, so the edict, but Darius signs an edict. Anyone who refuses to pray to him, prays to others, will be thrown in the den of the lions. Well, wouldn't you know, they catch Daniel right away in the act of praying to his God, and they come to the king, and the king has been entrapped by these men that he set up as supervisors. It looks like he sees what has happened. He's not the brightest guy. Remember, these are subtle jabs at the empire. Darius, great ruler, not the brightest guy. He finally gets it when it's too late. The edict has been sealed. He regrets what's happened, but he's incapable and unable to break this edict. So Daniel has to be thrown in the lion's den. The next morning, Darius is going to check on him, and boy, isn't it a relief that Daniel's hanging out, doing all right. Says the angels closed the mouth of the lions. And so, there was echoes of chapter 1, as I mentioned. And there's also echoes to the latter chapter, was it chapter 3, I believe? Yes, where there was the golden image. You have to bow to the golden image. Daniel and his friends refused. They were thrown, but yet they persevered. There's echoes of that. In other words, what happened with Babylon is now happening with Persia. It's the new empire. Everything's the same. However, Darius wises up. He's going to, after he checks on Daniel, then he's going to have Daniel's accusers thrown into the lion's den, even with their children and their wives. Ouch. But I guess he's going to continue to clean house. And then the climactic portion of this chapter comes at the end, as each one has at the same point. It's the same template, where this doxology comes in, this liturgical announcement from the prime representative of the empire, the king Darius. And here is his new edict. Revere, respect, and fear the God of Daniel. For he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His authority is forever. He rescues and delivers and performs signs and wonders in heaven and earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So, once again, the empire is acknowledging, well, God's really in charge. The emperor is acknowledging and praising God with his own lips. I bring out repetitive points here, and I do that intentionally. Why? They're not my points. This is what the writing is bringing out with its repetition. Are these things. I want to remark on one thing briefly. This is something of a can of worms, Pandora's box, whatever, what have you. I've heard it preached, whether it be the Daniel in the lion's den, whether it be back in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the idea God keeps his people safe. I suppose that's a paradox. It's a yes and a no. There's examples in Scripture of God keeping his people safe. However, life teaches us certain simple and common experiences to observe. The statement without understanding its nuances is a slap in the face to Christians around the world who are being persecuted for their faith. Now, I think probably the most popular most recently has been in Afghanistan, although it occurs in other parts of the world more regularly. It's in the first century, the Christians found themselves on the wrong side of Rome and were being persecuted. The apostles, with the exception of John, as tradition says, all died of martyrdom. And even in the time of Daniel and his friends are anomalies compared to their own people who have suffered the calamities of empire. And so it's not a blanket idea. God just protects you when you're doing what's right. Life teaches us differently. But there is what there were, and also it has been said by some, even during the time of COVID-19, well, God protects his people. We don't have to be concerned with this, that, or the other, and protecting ourselves. But life teaches us there's been outbreaks in churches. People have died from receiving the COVID-19 in churches, and sometimes the same ones who say God protects still has medicine in their cabinets. Why is that? It's an inconsistency, but sometimes it's what helps us get through, and I get that. Daniel is a writing of hope, but it's not as much a writing of personal hope at this point as it is collectivistic hope. It was written in a world that thought according to the collective, not the me, but the we. Are we going to be okay? This is how they thought. Remember, lifespans were incredibly short. You lived through posterity and through community. This was their thinking. And so the idea here is through representatives like Daniel, it's going to be okay. The collective, we're going to survive. We're going to overcome this empire. And that's the nature of Daniel's writings at this point. And so if you have any questions, comments, please send them my way. And until next time, thank you all for joining with me.